Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the City of York Council Economy and Place Policy and Scrutiny Committee. You are joining us once again online, although we do see light at the end of the tunnel. We're not quite there yet, so we continue to have these committee meetings online. And of course, given the sudden and somewhat unexpected popularity of online council committee meetings, I'm sure we're being watched by hundreds of people tonight. So what you will see if you're watching is councillors showing you the best of the City of York Council, but also scrutinising the council in terms of our remit and asking questions about what it does. It's important that you know these are not criticisms, these are questions, as is our function as representatives of the residents of York. In fact, we are at this meeting the voice of the residents. The meeting will last for around about 2 hours with a short comfort break in the middle of it, and I think we better crack on. We do have a number of officers and invited speakers attending tonight. They will not be on your screens yet. We will bring them in as and when needed, and I will ask them to introduce themselves to you when they come into view. Councillors who want to ask a question will be raising their virtual blue hands. Unless they want to ask a question about what's currently being discussed, in which case they will wave their hand and I will take all questions in the order that I see them. Okay, so James, you've joined us. You're very welcome. I'm not sure if you don't want to just stop your video for the time being until we get to the item where we can bring you into view and into the meeting. Would that be okay? You're very welcome. And you, Sean, as well, you're very welcome too. And the same applies to yourselves. Okay. Okay, we've got a busy agenda tonight, so we will crack on. First of all, does anybody have any interests to declare? So they are things that are not on the public register, anything that could be prejudicial to what we're talking tonight or could be of pecuniary interest. Councillor Daubney. Can't hear you, Councillor Daubney. Is it just me? Or no, still can't hear you, Councillor Daubney. Sorry. No, we're still struggling.
Chair, it's Richard Jackson here.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah, I'm struggling to hear him as well. It's not just you. Councillor Daubney, can you hear us? If you could just indicate you can hear us. It might be worth you leaving the meeting and coming back in because you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. So it's a possible solution.
Okay, we'll give Councillor Daubney a minute to do that. And looking around, I think it's just Councillor Daubney that has any interest to declare for this meeting. Oh, I do hope we haven't lost him altogether.
I think he's arrived now back, so. It's Richard Jackson here. Unfortunately, Councillor Daubney, you are unmuted, but we unable to hear you. It might be worth trying to unplug your headset. There we go.
Right.
Yes, that's
hey, okay. We have you loud and clear.
My apologies.
Your interest will be silent no more.
I just wanted to make on the record, Chair, that I used to work for the council in economic development and inward investment up until 2015, when the Labour administration removed it, those functions into Make It York, just so that any watchers are aware of that.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. We got there. Excellent. And I'm glad you can participate in the rest of the meeting too. Okay, moving on to the minutes. You should have copies in your packs of minutes from the 11th of March, 2020. Can I move that as an accurate record and ask if there are anything arising from them? Councillor Taylor, you've unmuted.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry to be a pain. I just wonder if I can ask a question about the minutes from the 11th of March last year.
Of course.
It's about minute 61 over the page onto page 4. It's clearly before you were chair of this and before I was a member of the committee. But at that meeting, Councillor Barnes and Councillor Douglas had proposed that we needed to have more scrutiny through this committee, more scrutiny of Make It York. And the committee voted in favour of sending a message. I just wonder what happened. What happened next? Do we know? Does anyone know?
I do, Councillor Taylor. I believe, I stand to be corrected, I can check this with the chair of the Customer and Corporate Services Scrutiny Management Committee, but I believe that has sat on their work plan and is still sitting on the work plan. So I can raise it with them and ask them what's happening to that particular item. Councillor Douglas, you were present at the meeting. Do you have anything to add to that?
Please, because that's a year ago now.
Only that it was agreed, and it was because we felt as though the scrutiny that was going on through both economy and place and also children, education and communities over Make It York wasn't really hitting the spot in the depth or breadth of what we were looking to learn from them. So it was referred to CSMC or Audit and Governance, but I believe given the date of that meeting, it dropped off the radar due to the pandemic coming and hitting us very, very quickly afterwards. So I do believe it needs picking up again. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Douglas. I'll take that up with CSMC. I don't know what the feeling of this committee is. My feeling is that we've spent, after tonight as well, we will have spent quite a lot of time scrutinising Make It York, so this might be something that would sit better with CSMC. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, I'm not seeing any objection, so I'll do that. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Anything else from those minutes? No, okay, and there are also minutes of the meeting on the 24th of November 2020. Can I ask, is that an accurate record, or is there anything in there that people wish to raise? Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to raise, I know this is an age-old issue, but it particularly struck me about the York Station frontage minutes, that it didn't really reflect the full breadth of the conversation that we had, because we did raise some of the challenges around the design of the project and what the options were for making any changes. And I feel as though that the minutes reflect what the officers told us, but it doesn't actually reflect what members raised as concerns, and that actually scrutiny was being carried out over that at the time. So I don't know if there's any solution to that problem. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Douglas. So you've no problem with the accuracy, you're just saying they're not full enough. Okay. I think this is probably an age-old problem with minutes, isn't it? You have to impartially reflect what happened. And I guess once you start getting into the discussion, if you give more weight to one side of the discussion than the other, then you start to get into questions of sort of how accurate it is. But I take your point that they don't reflect the fullness of the discussion, shall we say, that we had on that at that particular meeting. I can certainly raise that with the minute taker, that we'd like to see not details of the discussions, but just reference to the full breadth of the discussion in future minutes. Does that sound acceptable to everybody? Okay, I will pass that on. Okay, that's great. And I think that's the first time I've ever had minutes questions as well. So that's good scrutiny. Okay, I believe that there are no public speakers to address us tonight. So we'll move straight into item 4 on your agendas, which is the Q3 Finance and Performance Monitor. And I believe we have Patrick Looker here to talk us through his excellent report. But Patrick, if you'd like to introduce yourself, job role, etc., for the people who are watching. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Patrick Looker, I'm the Finance Manager for Economy and Place within the Council. This report presented to the committee covers the third quarter finance and performance monitoring report for Economy and Place Directorate. It summarises data that was considered by the executive on the 11th of February, earlier this month. From a financial perspective, it continues to be a challenging year for the council and this directorate in particular. The report has identified that the directorate is forecasting a shortfall in its budget of £9.5 million. At Monitor 3, it's assumed that this shortfall is funded from a combination of the direct central COVID support grant, which totaled 12.6 million, as well as the government-funded income compensation scheme, whereby the government reimburses councils for 75% of lost income in the year after the council funds the first 5% of any loss. So where we've had income losses in areas such as car parking, we have to pick up 5% of the budget plus 25% of losses, and the government picks up the remaining 75%. The directorate budgets for £22 million of income from fees and charges, rent, sales and licences. And at Monitor 3, the forecast shortfall on all those income streams was £7.5 million. The main impact of parking was £4 million, close to more than half of the budget. Planning and licensing income around £1 million, waste related income around £1 million. Transport related income 400,000. Then we've got the Make It York rent, £500,000, and general commercial rents of £500,000 as well. Of those income shortfalls, all but the commercial rents, including Make It York, should be eligible for the income compensation scheme, and we can get the reimbursement from the government. It should be noted that the forecasts in this report were made prior to the lockdown that's occurred in the first quarter of 2021. Some of the income figures therefore will worsen, notably again parking, which could be up to £1 million worse, as effectively there's been very little parking in the first few months of this year. With regard to expenditure, the directorate is reporting COVID-related pressures totaling 1.7 million. Of this, 1.1 million related to the micro grant scheme that the executive agreed to fund in June. The other costs relate to the additional waste costs, as we have appointed additional staff during the year at times where sickness levels have been higher and individuals have been asked to isolate, and we've also had to introduce social distance service, so re-engineering that service. Obviously, the pandemic has also had a significant impact on a number of performance areas. There's been additional vacant shops and city centre footfall. They were identified within the text. Annex 1 looks at further detail at those indicators supporting the council plan, and Annex 2 gives you the KPI dashboard. I'm more than happy to answer finance questions that you might have. We've also got James and Tracy in the background who may be able to support some of the more detailed service questions should they come.
That's great. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for your report. Members, does anybody have any questions? Okay, I'm seeing your physical hand, Councillor Daubney. So yeah, please fire away.
Can I ask, thank you, Chair. Can I ask you whether you can also see my blue hand, or do you shift for a moment?
No, actually, for some reason, your blue hands are going up in your squares, and I was looking into the participant list. So I've got you, Councillor Daubney, and I've got Councillor Hollier, Councillor Douglas, and Councillor Hook.
Very
So
strange, because
okay.
Mine comes up in the participants list.
Okay.
Thank you, Patrick, for that report. Can I just ask a question about the vacant shops rate in the city? Traditionally, York was obviously very good in terms of occupancy of shops. We were second only behind Cambridge for many years. Can I ask whether that is roughly the same position as we are in now?
I see Simon's come on, he's probably in the better position to answer that.
The vacancy.
Sorry, Simon, if you'd like to just introduce yourself to.
Apologies, Simon Britton, Head of
public.
Economic Development at City of York Council. Apologies for appearing out of the shadows without introducing myself. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Councillor Daubney. The last research that was published by Centre for Cities showed that York had the second lowest vacancy rate of all cities in the UK. Clearly, that's changed significantly over the last year or so through the COVID pandemic. The last figures I have as a comparator for York, which it must be said are based on a slightly different basis from the figures that you have in terms of what we report through council, which is based on vacancies reported through the rate system. We also have data from the local data company who survey all of the town and city centres across the whole of the UK. The last time they surveyed York was actually in August rather than any, so it's about 6 months ago now. That showed that the vacancy rate in York was somewhat up. It was still well below the national average, which at the time was about 13.5% vacancy rate. York was up to about 10%, but the figure that had been previously reported was closer to 8%, and the number those figures are slightly different, as I say, from what you've been reported. So we are, I can't tell you whether we are still the second lowest. I can tell you that the rate has gone up significantly, the vacancy rate, but it's still below the national average. Clearly it's something that we're monitoring, and the true vacancy rate, I guess, will become clearest once we get past whichever of the steps we need to get the city centre open again properly. So by this summer it'll be clear which of those shops that actually haven't been open for a long time will actually reopen or not, and then we'll be able to tell what the full situation is. But you're right, the situation has got somewhat worse.
Yeah, that's great, Simon. Clearly we're in difficult times. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Daubney. I'll just supplementary on that, Simon, before you disappear. I noticed in the report that we were doing better for City of York Council-owned properties. Do we know what the vacancy rate is in City of York Council-owned properties?
As I understand it, we still have no vacancies at all, but Tracy may be in a better position to answer that question.
Yeah, Tracy Carter, Interim Director of Place at City of York Council, responsible for the council's property portfolio, including its commercial portfolio. We have, I think at the moment, 6 vacancies across our portfolio, which, given that we've got 1,400 different sorry about that. We've got 1,400 different contracts and leases and etc. That is a relatively small level which you would expect to have at any point a number of vacancies, and a couple of those are actually under discussion for offer. So we have quite a unique portfolio, and our shops tend to be the smaller kind of shops that would be suitable for more for kind of independent shops, and I think that particular part of the economy at the moment is faring better. What you're starting to see become apparent across the city centre is the impact of national chains having gone into administration or closed or been bought out by online retailers. And therefore the increase in percentage of overall shops across the city. We're probably kind of catching up with the rest of the country in terms of those shops having closed and become vacant. But our own portfolio has been slightly insulated by the nature of the shops that we've got. Now, that's not to say that there won't be further ones coming into play as we go through the opening up. I think in the next 3 months, this is the point when businesses who have been hoping for an earlier opening up may actually have to look at their business cases and consider their future. So I don't see this as being the kind of the end of the road, but we do have at the moment a really healthy portfolio. But I don't think that's necessarily representative of the broader economic position.
That's great. Thanks, Tracy, and you're very welcome to the meeting.
Thank you.
Councillor Hollier.
Thanks, Chair. It was just a question about paragraph 3 and the formula for calculating how much the government sort of help councils with the sort of loss of income. I guess we've all kind of given up the hope that they'll sort of honour the original promises to back councils fully. But is there a particular reason why it is so sort of convoluted that, you know, the council pays the first 5% and then they do 75 and then we do the remainder of that that's not in the, you know, what's the difference between this sort of odd formula and just saying the government will give 71.25%? The cynic in me thinks create a complicated formula and people won't quite realise how little support the government are giving on that. But is there an actual reason?
It is fair to say, Councillor Holly, a complicated formula, and it's a national one that's been set aside across the country. I think the rationale is that the government believes that local authorities should have some form of reserves that helps them through particular shocks, and this is obviously a particular shock, but the rationale for the actual justification will be sitting on someone's desk within the civil service at MHCLG, and it's very difficult for me to comment on how they came up with such a formula.
Yes, Councillor Hollier.
So just to confirm there, there's no difference sort of at the end of the day between we pay the first 5, then the government pays 75% of the 95%. I'm just saying the government's paying 71.25. Doesn't sort of work out.
The way it's done is on individual lines within the budget. So there are still some areas within the council budget where income is holding up. So those areas, like for instance, probably land charges might be an example where, thanks to maybe the change in stamp duty, our land charges are broadly on budget because there have been more people coming in with searches. So we would exclude land charges from any part of the claim. So it's particular lines within the budget that have these formulas that are ascertained against it, rather than the entire council income that's being considered. So there's some quite complicated spreadsheets that we have to complete to MHCLG on a quarter. No, I think they're doing 3 a year. So we've received income from the first third, but we've still got 2/3 still to come through.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hollier. Any more?
No, I think I remain cynical.
Yeah, I think I share your cynicism. Can I just for people watching, so the MHCLG is the Ministry for Housing and Communities Local Government, and also just in layperson's terms, how much of the COVID tag is the council having to pick up, roughly?
I'd probably leave that for the Section 151 officer as part of the corporate return. What you will have seen from the report that went to executive last year is we are forecasting an overspend, which we may, if that continues through to the end of the year, require a dip into council reserves, which will be the first time that in my time at the council that we've have had to go into reserves at the end of the year. I think it is fair to say that the government have also provided significant elements of individual funding for different parts of the services, but at some point we're going to have to do a major reconciliation of all the government funding and all our expenditure. Again, it's quite difficult to ascertain exactly how much of our costs or how much of our lost income have come through from COVID specifically. So it is, to be fair to both the government and the council, very complicated calculations that we have to do.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there and bring in Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. My question's on the government funding as well, so I believe it's for Patrick. You mentioned that we'd had the first third of funding. I assume that covers from March 2020 to some point past that. How are they paying on time, or are we having to wait excessive amounts of time and having to chase payments, Patrick?
The 4 tranches of government grants, which are the main elements that have been supporting the general expenditure costs that the council have had to pick up, we received I think the majority of that in the first 6 months of the year. The income compensation, we currently have only received our share of that from April through to the first 4 months of the year, so April, May, June, July. So we are a bit behind on that. We were expecting a payment earlier this month, which hasn't come through yet. Maybe they'll stay February, so it's still due to be coming in. There are other elements of funding which we have had in advance. We're currently getting quite a lot of public health support on some of the outbreak management fund. So it's a bit, some have been paid in good time, others we've had to be a bit later than we have actually expended.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this stems back from being an accountant. So I was trying to agree all your comments on later pages to that table at the front, but they didn't seem to tie in. Is that because your comments were primarily on income, and I don't know where income fits apart from the obvious one of parking? So
Yeah,
I couldn't agree it.
Yeah, the table is a slightly simplified table. I appreciate that, and included in that is the income and shortfalls and additional expenditures. So, as I say, broadly, it's £1.8 million worth of additional expenditure and £7.5 million of shortfalls in income is kind of the broad brush approach. But the way we have balance the budget at Monitor 3 from a corporate perspective is that where we have said that costs have been related to COVID, we can fund them from the COVID grant and the MHCLG funding. I think it's also worth stating that the MHCLG, and thank you Councillor Kilburn for explaining that one, is going to continue for the first quarter as well, and we have also been given a tranche of grant funding for Q1 next financial year. So the government do expect that the COVID implications will continue into the first quarter, and that was announced a little while ago. So,
right. So basically, I don't try and agree any of your comments to that front table.
Well, they broadly they should total up, but it is obviously
I can't see the
it is a summary of the overall position rather than a specific reconciliation. We try and provide that table at the front, which is more than goes to executive, just to give members a greater understanding for where the pressures are in the particular areas.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hook. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Patrick, for your report. I've just got a question around in Annex 1, Section 6, page 20 of the agenda pack. You've talked, Section 7, Section 6, sorry. City of York Council, the 12th fastest authority in distributing business grants to those who needed them most during the initial COVID-19 outbreak. And obviously that there's been subsequent grants announced since then. I just wondered how that was going. And also, obviously, being fast is obviously good in one sense in getting the help to where it's needed quickly. But what could we have some talk around what checks and balances have been in place on that?
A large number of the grants, it's actually been undertaken by Customer and Corporate Services. So the team in David Walker's area have been primarily responsible for distributing those grants, and on most instances there are specific web checks on the that again MHCLG have pulled together, that means that you can't make a payment out until you've done some of those checks. So we have put additional resources into that team to allow those grants to be paid to the businesses, because it's deemed to be something that we should be doing, because it's right for the businesses, it's right for their cash flow, and they need the support. So I think it's fair to say that that team really pulled out all the stops in getting some of these grants awards to those companies, and very grateful to them.
Thanks for that, Tracy.
Yeah, just to add, there's two different grant rounds that that we have contributed to. The first was the micro grants right at the very beginning of lockdown, where Simon's Brereton's team led the grant awards, and Simon's team are now doing a bit of a research piece into the impact that those grants had in the very early days, which maybe you want to ask Simon to comment on. And secondly, the additional resources grants that have been awarded since December. And Simon can also comment on our progress in awarding those ones.
Simon, I think Tracy's asking you a question there. You better give us a comment on those.
Yes, thank you for that. So in the first, Patrick referred to this in terms of some of the challenges in terms of our spend. Council made £1 million of our own resources available to support small businesses through the first phase of the lockdown. We awarded 1,114 micro grants of up to £1,000 to businesses across York that weren't eligible for all the government support that there was. We are just beginning to do some evaluation of that with businesses that received those grants to understand how they helped and to get a clearer picture of what the money was spent on and to see how those businesses are doing and what further support they might need going forward. That approach in terms of getting our resources out to the smallest businesses in York on the ground, we believe has been fundamental in terms of helping the York economy get to the position where we are at the moment. The ARG money that we've had comes from government, and that's been paid out, first of all, for the November lockdown, which you remember that far back when we thought everything was going to be open for Christmas again. And then again from January onwards, we've been paying out a similar number actually of grants. We're still receiving applications into that fund at the moment and are paying out to a very wide range of businesses that aren't eligible for the main government support, which is linked to businesses in rateable premises. So a huge range of people, whether they are mobile hairdressers, whether they are dog groomers, whether they are people using a co-working space where they're not the ratepayers themselves. Well over 1,000 businesses receiving those grants at the moment. All of those payments are subject to careful checks in terms of making sure that they're going to businesses that are eligible for the money, and a large number of them get fed through, for instance, some anti-fraud databases that the government have opened up for our teams to be able to use. The rates related grants are clearly linked to those businesses that are paying the rates bills as well, and we have for those we're also clear exactly who normally pays us money, and we're paying money back to them at the same time. So while we are paying, I mean, in terms of the number of businesses in York, about 7,000 businesses in York, about half of those are receiving grants from the council at the moment. It's a very unusual situation to be in. And clearly in that number, there will be some that we will continue to pick up as we go along and do audit and such like checks, but there's a lot of work going into making sure that the money is going to the right businesses that need it, and it's not going to people who shouldn't have it at the same time.
Okay, thanks, Simon. Councillor Pearson, you have a supplementary on that.
Yeah, thanks for the really detailed answers. That's wonderful. I was just wondering how many of those micro grants has there been any help available for sort of sole traders and freelancers, for example?
The majority of those in that first round, and indeed quite a lot of those that are getting grants at the moment, were precisely to those people, Councillor Pearson. So I say then they haven't been eligible for support through the mainstream government grants. There's been a lot of calls across the whole of the UK to provide grants to these businesses. Here in York, we've been doing that from day one, and we've put considerable support into those small micro traders. So it's very noticeable that a lot of the people that we're giving grants to aren't businesses that show up in the kind of mainstream business databases in terms of being part of Companies House. They're people who are sole traders. We've had a real insight into who makes up that population of self-employed in York, and a kind of a level of sample that's really giving us significant insight. So for instance, about of the 1,100 or so grants, something like 30% of them have gone to people in the creative sector, whether that's people who are doing music lessons, or people who are drama therapists, or people who are artists. A similar percentage have gone to people providing personal services. So in terms of hairdressers, mobile hairdressers, nail, all of these things, services that you can tell I don't personally use, but that are out there and very widely in our economy. A really important part of what we call the foundation economy in York, providing really vital income to households across the city. And then another similar percentage have gone to people in the construction trades as well. And particularly at the moment, the ARG money, something like a quarter of the grant money is currently going out to taxi drivers who or also many of those are self-employed as well. So we're providing support to businesses and business people who, I say elsewhere across the region, are still crying out for help, and here in York we're actually able to support them. I think it's a very strong response that we've had in terms of our York approach to supporting inclusive growth.
Can I just ask on that then, Simon? Because I won't be alone amongst the councillors who are contacted by businesses, as you described, but also businesses that are currently allowed to trade under the government regulations, but there's no market because there's nobody out there, so trading doesn't make any business sense to them. So those businesses could well be eligible for discretionary grants from the council.
It depends what sector they're in, and it depends what kind of premises they're in. But if then certainly we're providing, for instance, grants to businesses in the supply chain for hospitality. So people whose customers are all shut because they are pubs and restaurants, they're definitely eligible at the moment. We're supplying to them. And I say taxi drivers, we're treating them as being in the supply chain to the leisure industry as well. So yes, if they're not open because their customers are all shut and their customers are other businesses, then they are potentially eligible, and the application forms are still open there on the council website under the ARG, on the ARG page. I
think there's still some businesses that are going to fall through the cracks though, aren't they? So they're eligible to be open. Takeaways being a very obvious example, but in terms of their trade, there's nobody in town. So they're not selling much. Where do they fit in terms of grants, etc.?
It depends on. I mean, there's a very variable picture. If they're businesses that the government has deemed are still allowed to be open, then we're actually excluded from giving them grants if they're in rateable premises. So we're not allowed to give them.
Okay.
So
they could be open.
It's worth if anyone thinks they're eligible, they should apply. They will be properly considered by our colleagues. If they find that they can't, that they're not eligible, and that they're falling between the cracks, what we've said all along is that they should contact us on economicgrowth@york.gov.uk. We're still monitoring that inbox, still receiving emails into it, and we're still trying to help customers that come through in that way.
Okay, I'm going to move it on. It's just, I think I'm sure we've all been having contact from residents who find themselves throughout the whole process. There's been people who are unfortunately falling through the cracks. Okay, any more questions from members? No, everybody is okay with that. I've just got a quick question, and I'm conscious of the time, but I noticed that we fell off a bit on recycling in Q2. We had a draw up there. You're saying it's looking okay coming back, but if there could be a reason as to why the drop was and what we're doing about it, and also one of the common bugbears with residents, again, I'm sure we all hear about, is commingling. And I know that there's been an increase of commingling during COVID. And again, if maybe we could explain to residents what's going on there. So 2 questions. Why has recycling dropped? And 2, why has there been more commingling? James, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm James Gilchrist. I'm the Assistant Director for Transport, Highways and Environment. So in terms of the 2 questions, I think in terms of the rising commingling in Q2, and just to be clear what we mean by commingling, that's when we mix all the recyclates that residents present in the boxes together. That was probably, I would think, in Q2 to do with our COVID response. So we had challenges around social distancing, how we moved, particularly for recycling, where we have a driver and 3 loaders normally on a recycling crew, how we move those loaders around. It took us a little while to arrange for moving those 3 loaders around in a COVID safe way. And there was more commingling during that part of the summer. In terms of, I'm sorry, apologies, Chair, I've forgotten the second part of your question in responding to that about commingling.
Well, why we were commingling?
Yeah, which I think I've covered.
And the other question was why there was a drop off in recycling rates in general. I think it went from 56% to 49% or similar.
I'd need to do some digging to understand why that recycling rate dipped. I can't think of an obvious reason. I mean, recycling does fluctuate through the year, obviously. What it might be worth me doing is doing some comparison with that same quarter in previous years. But I'm not aware of a.
I would just say that there has been a reduction in garden waste collected this year, whether that's linked in with the the beginning of the year where we weren't doing garden waste collections. That has had an impact on our recycling performance this year because there was an element of material that we weren't collecting for a period of time. So that would just be an observation I might have.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that Patrick's probably right.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Taylor, I can see you want to come in. Thank you, James.
Yeah, it's a different question, but it's probably a question for James, so I'll leap in now.
Sure.
It surprises me that the public realm indicators regarding litter are quite neutral, because I thought the amount of litter, and I think colloquially, people think that there is a lot more litter in the streets and in open spaces. But that seems to have mushroomed, and yet it's not showing up in the indicators. Am I wrong, or are people not reporting the litter?
I think it's probably partly to do with the reduced amount of people patrol, out and about. So I think if litter has increased, then there's probably less people out because we're all in lockdown than there were previously, and therefore it's not been reported, I suspect. We have been doing specific targeted operations around litter. So we've done some deep cleanses of specific areas in response to problems with litter. And we are treating COVID-related litter, so face masks and things, as in a different way to the way we would normally with litter. We're treating it like we would a sharp's needle. So we're taking that sort of extra precaution around those sorts of things.
Good. Hazardous waste. Thank you, James.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Thank you, James. And one last question from me. Obviously, there's been a huge year-on-year increase in terms of people receiving universal credit in the city. If anything, that would be set to rise, especially as furlough schemes, etc., come to an end. What are the impacts of that on the city economy and on the council finances and the people themselves, of course?
In terms of, the wider economy to some extent, the council is heavily supported by business rates. If businesses are failing, there's going to be less business rates coming forward. If people are losing their jobs and going on to universal credit, they are less likely to be fully paying council tax. They're more likely to be in receipt of council tax benefits, and then potentially the council receives less in its overall council tax take-up. So its revenues are reducing on that side. The government has recognised that to some extent and is supporting the council with additional support, taking into account that there's more people or fewer people in employment, but to some extent that's going to take time to sort of flow through, I would suggest.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Do we have any more questions, members? No, it looks like you're done, Patrick. Thank you once again for your report. So members, any recommendations or suggestions that you would like to make to the executive member or the directorate? I am very politely giving you time before I jump in with one of my own. No. Okay, I think certainly what it seems to be staring us all in the face in York at the moment is this concern over what's going to happen to our economy in the months ahead. We have strengths, obviously, as we'll see later on in terms of being a tourist attraction during if everybody's going to have a staycation this year, but we've also major problems with people finding themselves out of work and the implications for them. I would like to suggest to the to the Directorate that we look at putting something in place to try and maximise the amount of benefits that people are claiming, so that we make sure, working with partners, that people are getting the full entitlement to the benefits that they are entitled to, and that way we get as much money coming into the pockets of York residents as possible. So look at potential programmes for doing that. What do people think? What do members think about that? Yep. I'm seeing some nods. I see Tracy's arrived. Tracy.
Hi there. Sorry, it's just that the financial inclusion and the kind of whole benefits regime comes under the Corporate Scrutiny Management Committee rather than Economy and Place. That's outside of the Directorate.
Is it? It doesn't come under Economy and Place. That's strange, isn't it? Okay. So we could make a recommendation and say they'd say you're making it from the wrong place.
Can we make a recommendation to the other committee then, to CSMC?
Yeah, we can put that up to CSMC. Yeah. Okay, members happy with that? I'm very surprised that that doesn't come under economy, but there you go. Okay. All right, that's great. Thank you very much. We will pass that up to CSMC. Okay, next item of business. I think we will crack on. And this is item number 5 on your agendas, which is the Inward Investment Strategy update. And we have Simon Brereton and Tracy Carter back again to talk us through that and the reports that you've got in front of you, members. Okay, so who's going to lead off on this one? Is it you, Simon?
I think it is Councillor Kilbane. Yes.
Thanks, Simon. If you want to take the lead on this.
Thank you. So you have a report there which was presented to Councillor Waller's decision session in November of last year. And aware there are other people on the call as well who can talk around some of this. Inward investment is one of those areas. It's good to have Councillor Daubney here as somebody who's been involved. I believe Councillor Taylor's also been involved in inward investment previously in York as well. On one level, it's quite a technical issue, and on another level, it's actually quite a straightforward issue that many will find it relatively easy to understand. The paper in front of you talks you through the detail of how inward investment works and sets out what we think is we need to develop as a new approach to inward investment in the city, recognising that perhaps York hasn't been achieving what it might have done over the last few years. So we begin by looking at classifying inward investment into what we call FDI, foreign direct investment. So that's where a company from outside the UK comes and invests in York and create in the UK or in York and develops jobs. And UK-based inward investment, so where companies that aren't currently in our city decide to come and open up in our city as well. And then we also talk about proactive and reactive inward investment. So proactive being where we go out and try and seek people and attract them to our city. Reactive being where we put the information out there and wait for the people who want to come to York to come, and then we help them through that process. The report then talks through the approach that we recommend in terms of developing a prospectus, an active partnership, and some incentives. I'll talk you through in a bit more detail what's in there. It's worth beginning just with a review for how York is doing at the moment. We set out in the paper the figures on just on foreign direct investment, so not the whole picture, but foreign direct investment in 2019, where government publishes figures. The UK in that period had 1,852 foreign direct investments, creating a total of 56,000 jobs across the whole of the economy. Yorkshire and Humber had 104 investments, resulting in 2,264 new jobs. York had 2 foreign direct invests, resulting in 18 jobs. So whereas the York business stock is 1 in 400 businesses are in York, 1 in 1,000 foreign direct invests are in York, and whereas the average foreign direct investment into the UK created 30 jobs, in York they were creating, the 2 investments created 9 jobs. So clearly it's time to refocus and think about how we can do a better job of attracting investment into our city. We talk about the proactive approach that we should take, very much a sector basis. and this, our approach to that, we began to sit that out in our brief to the York Central Master Developer, where we talked about the key sectors that we really need to work with, those that have been identified for quite some time in terms of our York economy. We talked about how we would work with our universities, our LEP, our colleagues at Make It York and other partners, including the Chamber. We talked about the kind of commercial space mix which York Central will offer, and that remains a very fluid position, particularly post-COVID, in terms of the kind of space that different businesses want, and actually in many ways is quite helpful to York. The changing patterns that we expect to see in terms of the size of people's offices are part of the challenge in our beautiful but compact city is the availability of different types of commercial floor space, and if businesses need less space for their employees, then what we've got to offer actually in York is a great mix of some new offices going up and some more quirky heritage spaces become a very interesting offer, we think, to the outside world. So our proactive approach needs to be based around those key sectors and needs to recognise the space we have and needs to work through all of our partners to do what we can. The reactive approach, it takes inquiries which often come through national government, through Department for International Trade, through the embassy network around the world, and indeed through the web, through whether that's through ourselves, through say Make It York, through the universities or through others, and works with those people who've already said they want to come to York and helps them develop their business case to get here. There's a lot of technical work that goes on behind the scenes for both proactive and reactive work, and that's around making sure that people are realistic in terms of what they want to do. It's very important that we're very clear with investors at an early stage if whether their business will fit with York, whether the kind of things that they would like to do and build in York are actually possible in planning terms, what it might mean in terms of the workforce that they need to employ and such like. So a lot of technical work needs to happen behind the scenes there, which the reality is a lot of that actually needs to happen within the council. It's where the expertise is and it's where the decisions are made. But in terms of the outward looking part of it, the inward investment prospectus is really the key tool, has been for a long time, and we recognise that we need to really get our prospectus in York straight. Well, we talked through in the report about some of the key elements in there, some of the strengths of York in terms of things that can attract investors to York. We talk about the kind of incentives that might be available to attract investors, and clearly the enterprise zone is a very key part of that. Enterprise zone being focused on York Central, which is, as you'll be aware, the main locus in terms of development land for commercial space within the city in the local plan. We then go on to talk about how we really need a renewed focus within the council in terms of inward investment. As Councillor Daubney said at the start of the meeting, the inward investment was one of the things that we essentially outsourced in 2015 when we passed a lot of our economic development functions out to Make It York. We need a greater emphasis and some officer resource to focus that, and we need to be leading it from a strategic level from within the council. Inward investment, of course, is far more than simply marketing and clever design. It's also, a lot of it is around that really detailed back office work that I've talked about there. We talk about what we need to do in terms of working together with an inward investment working group, partners across the public and private sectors. The LEP are a really important partner in all of this. They are our route to government. I'm sure James will have more to say around that, and we all want to work much more closely together around that in terms of responding to stuff that comes in through government. But also we need to be working with our developers, key business sectors, to identify key targets in terms of other businesses may attract to York, and also to help businesses as they come to York land properly, and indeed to develop their business cases in terms of thinking, can they get the right kind of employees and such like in the city. So that approach around partnership working, coordinated by the council, working with all of those partners, is very central to our approach. We need to really take on the work that we started with that brief to master developers for York Central to develop it into a proper prospectus. We need to develop a stronger team within the council around inward investment, and above all, we need to make sure that we do far better than we've done in the last few years in terms of actually attracting investment into our city. I'll stop there, as I could talk for hours on this topic, but that's not really the task of my task this evening. It's to give you an introduction to what the report says, and hopefully to spark some questions and to leave some gaps for those other people who are in the meeting this evening to make their contributions too. So thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much for speaking to that report, Simon. I've seen hands going up. I've got 4 councillors all itching to ask questions, which is great. But what I suggest we do is, before we bring in our guests who are also talking on this topic tonight, and bring that into more sort of general discussion, that we take a 5-minute break before bringing those in. The exception that I'll do, and I've got all your hands written down in order, so I won't forget where you are. The exception to that is unless anybody's got any points of clarification from Simon about the report, anything in there that's not clear to them that they want explaining before we move into general discussion with our guests. I mean, I asked that question because I do, which is, what is immersive storytelling? Apparently, that's one of our world-leading strengths.
It is, absolutely. Well, yes, so it's a good bit of jargon, isn't it? So really, immersive storytelling is about the kind of work that I mean, the Jorvik Viking Centre is a classic example, really, of that. It's around how we take communicating interesting things, whether that's around our heritage or around other sides of that. And I mean, for instance, you know, Revolution Software in York is a very strong games producer. That's immersive storytelling.
Oh, okay.
I think. So it's a set of skills around how you use modern media and technology to produce really compelling stories that people want to understand and know about. And as I say, there's a real strength in York, which probably you can chart back to really the development of the Jorvik Viking Centre 30 years ago or so, and continues to be a real strength for the city.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Simon. Any more points of clarification before we all go and get a glass of water or a comfort break? No, I'm not seeing any hands going up. Okay, it's 27 minutes past on my clock, so I'm suggesting that we start up at 32 minutes past. We will welcome our guests, ask them for an overview of their take on inward investment, past, present and future, and then all of those points that you're itching to ask councillors can be put to the officers and guests. So, okay, so back in 5 minutes. If you'd like to do, there you go. Hello and welcome back. Welcome back to the City of York Council Economy and Place Policy and Scrutiny Committee, where we are currently discussing the inward investment strategy of the city. We have had a report from officers, and we are now joined at our meeting by some honoured guests. We have Andrew Digwood from the York Chamber of Commerce. We have James Farrer from the Local Enterprise Partnership for York and North Yorkshire. We have Sean Bullock from Make It York, and we have Councillor Andrew Waller, who is the Executive Member for Economy and Place. So what I would like to do is for each of our new guests, with the exception of Councillor Waller, to just give us a quick overview of their organisation and what they do in terms of inward investment, and then I'm going to open it up to the councillors who've been waiting very patiently to ask their questions on this subject. So, who wants to start us off from our guests who've just arrived? Here we go. I'm just looking at my screen, and Andrew, I'll go with you first. Is that okay?
Thanks, Councillor Kilbane. Yes, thanks for letting me speak to the meeting this afternoon. Good evening, everybody. I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with the York and North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce already. We're part of the Western North Yorkshire Chamber, together with our friends in Leeds and Bradford, which have their own separate chambers. And of course, we are part of the British Chambers of Commerce network. And together we represent member businesses across our respective patches. We engage in partnership activities with the likes of the council and the LEP and other organisations, and we carry out lobbying on issues that affect businesses and our members in particular, obviously, to local and national policy makers. In terms of inward investment, we're always keen to support and promote our respective chamber patches wherever we can in that regard. And certainly I echo some of the comments that Simon Brereton highlighted and reflected on in his presentation. It does seem a while since the last very major inward investment arrival, if you like, high profile one, which was probably, in my recollection, would be Hiscox. And I was thinking back to that was under my several times removed predecessor, Richard Flanagan's time as Chamber President. So you're going back quite a few years there. And it's a shame, because I think we recognise and our members recognise that this is a fantastic city in which to do business. And we really welcome a renewed focus on that. I don't know whether you want me to give any comments at this stage on the report, the paper, and reflections on that, Chair, or do you want to keep that for a discussion afterwards?
I think we'll keep that for discussion, I think, and then we'll have a really full discussion around it. That's great.
But we think, I mean, yeah, we're very keen to support this as an agenda and think it's incredibly important, particularly at this point in time.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. And next on my screen is Sean. It's just like playing bingo with names, isn't it? You don't know who's coming next. So Sean Bullock from Make It York. If you'd like to
thank you.
An overview of Make It York's role.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Yeah, Make It York, of which I'm Managing Director, is a wholly owned company of City of York Council. Has various responsibilities in relation to the city centre, in relation to tourism, and in relation to economic development. When it was established 5 or 6 years ago, various functions from CYC were tupied into Make It York, including the economic development role at the time. That's evolved in various ways since, and discussions are ongoing now with CYC to finalise that economic development role and indeed the rest of the role in future years by way of a new SLA. Like Andrew, I think I would absolutely agree that economic development and obviously inward investment and trade is hugely important to the future of the city, and something Make It York will make every effort to contribute to as much as it possibly can.
Okay, thank you, Sean. And last but by no means least, James, if you'd like to introduce yourself and the role of your organisation with Inward Investment.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Kilbane. I'll be brief so we can get on to the brunt of the discussion. So I run the York and North Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership. We're a public-private partnership aimed at driving economic growth across the whole of York and North Yorkshire. So the leader of City York Council sits on our board, and we've got several private sector members from York on the board as well. We are just in the process of updating and renewing our Inward investment strategy, really driven by some changes in geography about 12 months ago. So the timing of this is absolutely appropriate, but I concur with everything that Andrew and Sean have said to date. So I won't repeat that, and we'll get into the thrust of the discussion.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, James. So, Councillor Hook, yours was the first hand that I saw raised. So, what questions would you like to ask?
Thank you, Chair. It's just that from paragraph 43 in the report, in view of how much needs to be done for Inward investment, and was described by Simon, and we've only got staffing of 1 plus a few proportions. I just wondered how they could cope even using our partners with all the work that's involved and needed to be done. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So that staffing of 1 is based within, so that's based within Make It York. So Sean, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, and I think the conversations we've had with CYC to date have been very much about the fact that we have limited resource and we need to focus it and coordinate it as collaboratively as we possibly can. I think there is with Brexit and obviously post-COVID recovery, there is an increasing amount to be done if we're to raise the profile and bring in the business that we think is out there. Balance. But I suppose we have to balance for that what we can afford to pay for, and there will always be limited resource, in terms of people. I don't know if anybody from CYC would like to comment on that. But of course, beyond Make It York, there is a regional function, James, at the LEP. But others may like to comment as well on the resource.
I'll go to James first because his hand's raised. So go to James and then I'll come to CYC. So James.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hook. I thought it was absolutely the right question, and I think it's a really good point. And you can very easily waste a lot of resource and spend a lot of money on Inward investment with very little return. So it's something that needs to be considered really, really carefully. So the focused approach to what we're trying to do is really important, but also the importance of collaboration, working with partners, and making sure that it's not just a City of York funded thing. It's something that we do collectively together. If you think about the tasks that need to be done in delivering Inward investment, there are a range of functions, what you might call back office work around building the evidence base, building the cases, where actually there's real value in us working together and sharing the cost of doing that, because ultimately the evidence base is the same. We're just shaping it slightly differently for different places across the piece. And what we don't want is us all to be developing that resource and duplicating it. So I think the critical to doing this effectively, because none of us are kind of flush with cash, we're all having to deal with austerity, is actually how do we ensure that Make It York, the LEP, City of York Council, collaborate, and we only do each job once, and we make sure that we have the right experts doing that job, so we have the best quality information with the best proposal for York and the best set of connections we can possibly make. So I think breaking it down into understanding the tasks and then understanding how you deliver those tasks in the most effective way is going to be critical, because otherwise we will all spend an awful lot of money duplicating what we're all doing the same thing.
Okay, thank you, James. City York Council, who's coming in? So we got Andrew, were you indicating there? And then Tracy's indicating too.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come in on that point, I think it has been demonstrated during the pandemic, the very close working together and breaking down of silos, which had arisen. So I think it's about taking the experience of that, of pulling in the same direction, of ensuring that things are as well connected as they can be. I think that I would encourage everyone to be involved with the consultation process I'm not about telling business what they want. I think it's about listening to the ways in which the council and partners and everybody else can work together better. And it is, as James has said, it shouldn't be down to one person. It's a bit like the sustainability officer isn't the only person who's going to deliver climate change response. It's about ensuring that everybody is reading from the same hymn sheet, and that we have looked at ways in which we can all help to promote the city, ensure that there's no wrong door, that people who are interested in coming and investing in a city are connected to whoever can help them next in that phase. And that's why some aspects of the work I think need to come back in-house, some of the questions, but it's about getting it right for those independent conversations that many businesses want to have with people who are already doing business in the city. Thanks,
Okay,
Chair.
thank you, Councillor Waller. Tracy, you're going to come in, and then Andrew wants to come in on this topic as well. So, Tracy.
Yeah, I think it's very much underlining what both James and Councillor Waller have said, that you can very easily spend a lot of time and a lot of money on kind of throwing out leads in inward investment. But what we need to be very timely and specific about in York is the unique offer that York has, and therefore the kinds of businesses that we would want to attract, and working regionally on developing the contacts and the evidence base for that is really important. And we are currently having discussions with James about how the council and the LEP might work together more closely on that, and discussions with Make It York about how we unite the resource that we have got available to us, because there is a limited amount of budget available for that. But it's making every contact work for us, and we live and work within an economic eco substructure where there are a lot of players in this. And I think the council's role isn't to be the only game in town. It's got to be about joining the dots on those conversations between businesses, between business organisations, between the public sector and the private sector. And I think that's where we need to focus our activity, on getting a really tightly defined strategy and plan, and then going away and doing the hard yards to actually bring that into a reality. And it isn't rocket science, but it does require a very concentrated focus on what you need to do, and then going on and doing it.
Thank you, Tracy. Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. It was just to respond to something that Councillor Wallace said, actually. I think he's absolutely right that the pandemic response has shown how successfully and how well a real partnership between the public and private sector can work, and how constructive those partnerships can be. And I also take his point about sort of everybody, it's for everybody to do their bit around inward investment for our city. But equally, I think that we mustn't lose sight of the fact that it needs very strong, high profile and identifiable leadership as an exercise and as a piece of work. And I don't think that Councillor Waller was trying to say otherwise, but I worry that sometimes in saying it's everybody's responsibility, it becomes nobody's responsibility, and nobody has ultimate accountability for that. And when you get a phone call from that exciting inward investment opportunity who wants to come to York, who do you put in front of them at short notice? Who do they need to be talking to? And that's something that I think we really need to ensure that we have absolute clarity about if we're serious about taking this forwards.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Councillor Hook, did you have anything to come back on that? Are you happy?
No, I mean, I would love to publicise York and sell its beauties, because I agree with that. So, but yes, it's very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. And just to start off with, I wanted to make a comment along similar grounds to Andrew as well. The reality is that this actually is a sales job. We're selling a business in essence, and you do need leadership. And somebody needs to be given the full responsibility for that. And we can have all the plans in the world, but unless somebody is given that responsibility, it's not going to come through to fruition. And so really that leads me on to my question for organisations that are here. In a regular year, and I don't think that we can look at 2020 to 21 as a regular year, I'm wondering how many inquiries we actually have around inward investment, or how many leads that we do generate, and where they're falling down, because let's face it, you know, two inward investment successes and 18 jobs in 20 is just, it's woeful performance, and there's something going wrong here, because we all know that York has so much to offer. It's connectivity, it's training and level of education, the workforce. I could go on. So perhaps you would inform me of where our process is falling down at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Douglas. Sean, should we start with you on that one? Can't hear you, Sean. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Yes, thank you for that, Councillor Douglas. Yeah, I'm just having a look at the basically in relation to the last 6 months. According to the figures I've received from my team, Make It York received 13 new inquiries from a mix of Indigenous, UK and foreign-owned businesses, range from start-up, asset management, manufacturing, R&D and energy businesses. And there was a further lead which we are looking to realise, which would create an additional 200 jobs in the city. So broadly speaking, as I say, in relation to 6 months, 13 leads is the number I can give you.
Thanks, Sean. James?
Yeah, so Sean will be kind of more accurate with some of the numbers around the leads we've had. I think it's important to remember that those figures are foreign direct investment figures that we're talking about, not the Indigenous businesses or the UK-based businesses that have been relocated to York. And I think if you look at, if you like, where York is perhaps weakest, and its availability of large sites. So if you look at lots of the foreign direct investment, it will typically be larger investments and larger sites, and York, because of the constrained nature of its boundary, isn't blessed with a lot of large employment sites to locate them on. So I think if we could tease out the numbers of the UK businesses who might have located a second office to York or brought further business to York, I think the numbers would be significantly above that. So Sean, I don't know if you've got access to that information or not. So I think what you've got in York is an incredible asset. You know, is a fantastic place to live, great quality schools, incredible connectivity. What you don't have is a lot of space and a lot of sites. So I think how we position the city and how we position the city alongside Harrogate and Selby and Hambleton and some of the where they've got some larger sites is going to be really important, because what they've got, what they lack in the urban and strength of York, they have in space and some employment sites. So I think we need to think of the city as a city region. So it's York and it's hinterland. And I think we need to position it so we've got kind of slightly more economies of scale around that, because I think the whole city will benefit from doing that. So I think the figures are a little bit misleading in that they're just foreign direct investment, but we mustn't lose sight that we are constrained by a lack of sites.
Okay, thank you, James. Back to Sean.
Just to come back on that, I think James is absolutely right, obviously, about the physical constraints, but let's not forget, of course, York Central, which is a massive site, for the city and for the region as a whole.
Thank you, Sean. Simon.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, on that UK inward investment track, there have been a couple of quite significant inward investments into York on that front over the last year. So a software firm called Boxy have moved in to York from outside of York, and have actually taken some of the space that was freed up when Superbreak went bust. And there's also a law firm that's moved in and taken quite a bit of the space in the Hudson Quarter as well. So there are inward investments like that going on, and clearly we've been involved in some of that work, and some of that comes through the discussions that developers have in terms of selling space. You know, a lot of people who want to get an office in York will look and see what's available in terms of property sites, and not think of coming straight to the council around that. Our job then is to try and ease them into York and make sure that they get embedded properly within the business community here. So even in difficult times, we are getting businesses coming into York, typically, as others have said, from elsewhere in the UK rather than from overseas.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Councillor Douglas, I think you had a supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is that I do understand some of the limitations that York has, but I still think that we have far more strengths than weaknesses, and we should be seeing more business development within our city. And what I asked you is about the process and where it's falling down. I suppose really this comes back perhaps to this responsibility aspect. Where does the first inquiry go? What's the process? And then why are we not converting more of those inquiries into actual businesses into the city? It is a sales process. I'd really like your views on that. Thank you.
Okay, I think that one's back to you, Sean.
Yes, well, thank you. I think there's I think there's a number of different ways of looking at this. I think, my view in relation to inward investment is it's really fundamentally about relationship building. So it's about establishing relationships with everything from government departments to individual investors to businesses who are looking to set up, to trade partners who might want to trade with or set up or establish a base in York. And that's all about a pipeline, and that's a long-term process. And some of that will come to fruition more quickly than others. But I think that process is of that pipeline. To be honest, I don't know the extent it's existed in York in the past. I've been here for 2 years, but certainly that's very much the basis of what we're talking about with CYC going forward, creating that pipeline by building those relationships. In terms of the formal inquiries which come in, some of those will come into to Make It York, some of those will come into the City Council, some of them will come in initially to the LEP. But that tends to be more of the reactive rather than the proactive.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Simon, I can see you want to come in, but Councillor Waller, you've unmuted. Did you want to come in?
It was just to follow up that fairly early on when the owner of Boxy was interested in relocating into York, he contacted me and I was able to signpost him to people who would help. So there are people who come in direct. They want to discuss, is the council interested in supporting business? And in the past I did create some space, having decided to relocate the project for the council headquarters away from Hungate to where West offices are, and therefore ensured that there was some space for Hiscox to come to. So I think it is about maximising awareness of what there is. As Simon Browison mentioned, that had been a vacant area, and it was just finding out what support there is. So there are people who will come forward to whoever they pick up the phone or send the email to, and it's about ensuring they get the encouragement that we are serious, and in that case we were. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Waller. Simon and then James. Simon.
Yeah, thank you. You started, Councillor Douglas, by saying this is a sales job. It's a full sales job. It's not just about providing a sales pitch and attracting people who might be interested in selling. It's about then converting that interest into real investment by making sure that you meet all the things that potential customer needs. And I think part of the challenge that we've seen is the fragmentation of inward investment across multiple organisations. So, while it's good to hear from Sean that there's been 13 projects that have come into his team, those certainly haven't resulted in 13 contacts with my team around how we can then really work with those investors to make sure that the right planning is in place, the right space is in place, and the right transport and skills infrastructure in place. So I think that's a big part of the challenge, really, is how we, as Sean himself said, how we make the most of that fragmented resource and work collaboratively across the whole city as well as we possibly can.
Thank you, Simon. James?
Yeah, again, I think it's a really good question, Councillor. There's a really good point actually around the process, in that, you know, it's too fragmented. So, you know, Sam's absolutely right with what he says, and you know, we have to ensure that when we get an inquiry, the professionalism of that response and the speediness and the kind of consistency in how we approach and we respond to that is right every time. Because at that first inquiry, whether it comes into the LEP or make it York, or you know, we don't know who will and won't turn into a real business. So there has to be that level of consistency across the piece, and we aren't joined up enough at the moment, and we've all got responsibility to sort that out. I think also, in addition to what Simon's talked about, the premises and the skills and all those issues, I think the Chamber and other businesses have got a really important role to play at an early stage, in that we want that business to feel that it is welcome. We want that business to feel that it's going to be part of the business community that he's coming into. And I think we need to think about how we, as the public sector, if you like, get the process bit right, so we get that right information across in a very, very professional way, but how we also bring the private sector to the table at an early stage, so that whoever is thinking about York actually isn't just speaking to the public sector, he's speaking to the businesses who are already here, who are already enjoying being here, and actually is going to be made welcome to be in the city. So I think we need to look at the stage-by-stage process, every step of it, and say, what does best in class look like? And how do we ensure that wherever they come into the system, that's what is delivered? I don't think we can hand on heart say that that is the case. Certainly, as a LEP perspective, we need to improve on that.
Thank you, James. And Andrew Digwood.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to endorse really what James has said, and I think, you know, to the risk of harking back to Hiscox yet again, I think that was an example of where that worked really well, of a combination of private sector representation through the Chamber, working with the council and the public sector, really to bring that home and bring them to York in that fantastic spot on Hungate that Councillor Waller was talking about. So yeah, no, I completely agree with that. But we also, you know, it's right. Councillor Douglas was right when she talked about it being a sales job. But it's more than just a document, a prospectus. We've really got to, as I think the report said, put our best foot forward, and that means this high profile, visible leadership and accountability for it. I'll say that again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Councillor Daubney, you were indicating you wanted to come in.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether you can see my blue hand, which has obviously been there a little while now.
I thought it was a new question, Councillor Daubney. I didn't realise it was a supplementary.
No, it's the same one, really. Okay. Obviously, I've been involved with inward investment in the city for a long, long time now. Ever since I joined the council in 1989, with the campaign for prosperity was running in those days. Now, one of the key things which has just been alluded to, I think, by James or Andrew, was that we bring in, and we had a collection of local stakeholders, including the Chamber, for example, and others, but also the big businesses in the city, people like Nestle, who, when we produced a video, could talk to any prospective investor and say, this is why we're in York, this is what's good about it, this is how we get good quality, well-trained, well-qualified members of staff for our workforce, etc., etc. And of course, with York Central, we've got a key asset which is just bringing forward. Now, I can tell you that asset began being planned way back in 1989 and before. So it's taken a long time to bring that great asset for the city to fruition. The last major inward investment which we did in the economic development unit in the council was Hiscox, and I can tell you that Katie Stewart, the head of economic development in those days, did an awful lot of work selling the city, hand-holding Hiscox all the way through, from first inquiry right the way through to signing the papers and joining us in the city. And I hope they're very glad they did so. So I'm very happy to talk to anyone about my experiences over 25 years. I can obviously give you quite a few points and tips, but those are some for the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Daubney. Just before we move off this particular topic, there's something that's been going through my mind, and it's something to do with what you were saying, James, about the lack of sites for foreign direct investment. So in terms of wanting large plots of land. Because obviously, if you look at the record, the number of jobs that we created through FDI, foreign direct investment, is woeful, really, even on a regional basis. Are we saying that foreign direct investment is just not right for York because of the size of it? Or are we saying that it is right, but it's got to be of a particular type? And, you know, I'm going to throw that to you, James, just because it was you made me think of this in the first place, not because I'm picking on you or anything, but it's just been it's been bugging me, really. Is it just we're not the right kind of city for large-scale foreign direct investment?
No, I think there's a number of issues. I think to start with, we've got to think about York as being bigger. So whilst there aren't the sites within the City of York council boundaries, actually very close to the City of York in our neighbouring authorities, there are some fairly large sites. So I always talk in the kind of along the lines of, you innovate in the City of York, you grow in the York City region. So York's got really strong innovation assets. You look at some of the world-class work going on around the bioeconomy and the University of York, which, you know, make York have kind of teased out some of these kind of key strengths. If you know, there's some genuinely world-leading R&D happening around this stuff. We just need to make sure that when we talk about the package, we have the whole package. And if you think about York City region, if you think in world terms, within commuting distance of York is 2 million people, because Leeds City region is half an hour away. You have major employment sites in Selby, in Harrogate, in Hambleton, where you can access all within accessibility of York. And you've got this world-leading kind of R&D going on in the City of York. So we need to think of York in the, if you like, in the way that a business would look at York, not on what is a local authority boundary, and position it in that way. And it's a much bigger, much more compelling offer that you've got there, which actually can then stand and be counted. So if you like, if you want every one of those jobs to be physically located in the City of York, you are going to constrain yourself. But if you look at the benefit to the City of York and realise the benefit of somebody locating in Selby or Harrogate or around it, but actually doing the R&D and kind of providing the good quality jobs for the City of York as well, York City region is a much more compelling offer.
Okay, thank you, James. And Andrew, I can see that you want to come in.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly, because I know you want to move on to the next item, but I just wondered if it was worth just sharing three thoughts really to build on what James has said, or to add to that, I suppose. I think the report as it stands does a good job of identifying those key sectors where York has real strengths. And I think that's what this should be all about. You know, Sean touched on limited resources earlier, and we do have limited resources available as a city. So let's focus them on our strengths and on those opportunities that best align with what we feel our identity and our values as a city to be. And I know it had its supporters and detractors, but, you know, for better or worse, that city narrative exercise that took place a couple of years ago, you know, it actually produced something that was quite tangibly and recognisably York. And I think we shouldn't lose sight that might have some value in that exercise. And then thirdly, from the Chamber's point of view, I think, you know, we would really say it's all about removing barriers to businesses locating and growing here. And that's about getting the fundamentals right, the underpinnings of successful business here right. I don't want to derail into a discussion about the local plan, but it's stuff like housing, transport infrastructure, all that other sort of stuff. You can't look at that in isolation from inward investment. They're all interconnected, which is something that I very quickly came to realise when I took on this Chamber role. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And indeed, that's mentioned in the report, isn't it? Quite high profile. Okay, so the next question on this topic is Councillor Taylor. Over to you, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I could probably talk all night about inward investments, but I promise you that I won't, because I think much of it has been said, and Simon Brereton analysis is excellent. Alex Doherty's report, which we've had in front of us, is very valuable, and in my mind, it's an accurate investment of where we are as a city, and sensible indications of where we should go. And James also makes some important points about sites and capacity in the city and about the region. The tragedy is that York had a very highly successful and well-regarded inward investment board in the early 2000s, which brought about 2,000 jobs to York over 4 or 5 years. And it's sad that we lost that due to declining investment from the City Council, but also from the demise of Yorkshire Forward. This has been covered, but as it says in paragraph 3 of the annex, Make It York has merely responded to inquiries. It's failed to do the proactive work to promote the city on inward investment, and the scant 18 jobs which have been mentioned of foreign direct investment have come our way for other reasons. I think Councillor Hook has put a finger on the issue of resources, and Sean has confirmed that really, that his team has not had the resource to do the job properly. So, trying to be positive, I think both Simon and Alex's paper rightly proposes the sectoral approach based on key growth sectors, rail, financial services, as well as what we used to call Science City York, bioscience, IT, and the creative industries. As the Inward Investment Board discovered, as a very small organisation, working in partnership was key, as James has also said, and Councillor Waller has also said. There is a lot of experience in this city of York, and some of that I think is overlooked. We mentioned a number of organisations, and we need to tie in with those very closely. But I think also the guilds have been overlooked, and perhaps we need to remember the experience and expertise of people in the guilds. And one further suggestion is that York should make greater use of its twin cities in seeking inward investment. Munster and Dijon certainly, but more specifically Nanjing, as well as cities like Suzhou and Shanghai, with which we have links at city government and mayoral level. And in a country like China, that can really open doors to two-way trade and investment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Douglas.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to think about the resources aspect, given the changes that have come about over the past year or so with the change of the boundaries for the LEPs. So now York is in with North Yorkshire, and James is here as that representative. We used to get quite a lot of money from Leeds City region, or relatively speaking, for inward investment, and that's not available to York anymore, as I understand it. So we need to look for new ways of generating external funding, and I just wondered what's going on around that at the moment from our partner organisations. Thanks.
Okay, James, I think it's back to you again to start us off on that one, and then we'll do the rounds.
Yeah, absolutely. So historically speaking, because of the partnership with Leeds City region, when it was overlapping geography, so we allow, they agreed to pick up the inward investment because they had the big resource over there. So obviously that geography is not the same anymore. So we're currently working on a strategy to understand how best to do that. Obviously, we don't have the resources, so Leeds City region were able to draw down some of their devolution type funding to kind of support that. Obviously, we haven't secured devolution in York and North Yorkshire yet, but I think that's the key. The problem with government funding at the moment is it's quite short-termism, whereas actually what we need is a consistent pot of money over a consistent period of time, so that we can actually put that resource in place, do the job properly, and we're not working on an annual basis. So to me, the key to developing a really kind of compelling inward investment, which is sustainable into the long future, is actually securing devolution for York and North Yorkshire, because that'll provide the money we need to do this job properly.
Okay, thanks, James. Sean, where are we going to tap into some money now that we're not part of the Leeds City region?
Well, I think the Devo deal is absolutely crucial and central to this. Simon, I think, mentioned earlier on the bioeconomy, and the whole Bio Yorkshire ask in that regard is really important to all of this, I think. So yeah, I mean, I think that Devo ask and the associated governance that goes with that will be absolutely critical, and in two ways really. Money, obviously, but as we know from Teesside and other areas, the seat at the central government table and the motivation for central government to make sure that devolved regions succeed will make a huge difference, I think. So that would be, I think, my primary focus.
Thank you, John. Looks as though we're all looking to devolution, Simon, unless you've got an alternative for us.
Well, I mean, it always comes down to choices, doesn't it? Where one spends money, and of course, you know, a lot of our efforts in terms of promoting our city are really focused in terms of the visitor economy, and those, although it might not feel like they're choices that they make, they are choices that we make to spend the money that we make. For instance, that the Make It York makes very successfully from its Christmas market on attracting more tourists. Equally, that organisation could be choosing to spend more of that resource on inward investment as well. So it's not purely about money that we can get from government. And you know, Councillor Douglas is right to point at our previous association with Leeds City Region. Of course, that 2019 year that we've highlighted this evening was one where we were being supported by a much larger team from Leeds City Region. And part of the challenge for that was getting York's voice heard in a much larger geography, where you've got, you know, a city of Leeds, which is 4 times the size of York, and would see itself as having key strengths in all of the sectors that we recognise as well, that kind of outrank us. So in some ways, the opportunities that that the new geography brings in terms of a much sharper focus on York can help us make the more of those resources. The Devo deal is clearly going to be important, but that's not the only place where we can get resources in. I know there are some opportunities still to work with DIT and the embassy network around this as well. I mean, it's clearly not on the same scale as hopefully we'll get when we've got that Devo deal, but there are resources there, and there are choices that we can make ourselves with our own resources in terms of what we do.
Thank you, Simon. And Tracy.
Just to remind you that although we are increasingly on an economic footing looking towards North Yorkshire, we are still in receipt of a fair amount of funding from West Yorkshire, particularly around those elements of infrastructure. West Yorkshire Transport Fund is funding much of the enabling infrastructure for York Central, as an example. So as James pointed out earlier, this is not just about the money we spend on targeting inward investment. It's about those other supporting aspects of making York an attractive place. And we need to make the most of those continuing connections to West Yorkshire, but we also need to have a pipeline of shovel-ready projects, the kind of easy phrase, to capture any potential investment coming out of the kind of levelling up agenda over the coming months and years.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. I think shovel ready is definitely better than oven ready. Yeah. Okay, members, any more questions on this report or points for the discussion? Are we all satisfied? Okay, any recommendations that we would like to make? We have Councillor Wallace sat here with us right now, so we can talk directly, as it were. Councillor Douglas.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to see that within our plan that there is a clear line of responsibility and a clear process that everybody understands and goes through, so that these leads that come in are not lost. That's the first rule of any sales process, is do not lose your leads and take them through to the final stage. So as I always say to you, I don't like to see a strategy that just sits on the shelf. It needs to be practical, it needs to be carried through, and I think that element that I've just described really puts the icing on the cake in that respect.
Thank you, Councillor Douglas. Members, any other members? I got to say, I'm not going to do that thing where I wait for 10 seconds and it forces somebody to speak. The thing that struck me when I was reading through the report time and time again was, great ideas and, ways that we could move forward. But I just kept on thinking, who's going to do it? And how are they going to do it? And, who's going to actually pick up the reins on this and run with it? So I think sort of tying in with what Councillor Douglas has just contributed, but also what's been said, I think, here tonight about the process currently being too fragmented and it needing some leadership, really. You need somebody who is going to go out there and bat for York. And I think Joe Root's probably a bit busy at the moment, and it's probably not his skill set either. But somebody similar who is who can take the lead on that. That's the feeling that I'm getting, and that role, that job, would of course need to be properly resourced, which would be an issue in itself. So in terms of pulling the whole process together and putting it within a single entity, as it were, would that fit with what you were saying, Councillor Douglas? What do members think about that as a recommendation to Councillor Waller, who is sat in our meeting, so we can talk directly to him? What do you think? Councillor Taylor.
Thanks. I think that's right. I think what Councillor Douglas says is right, and other people have echoed that. The trouble here is that it's nobody's job at the moment. It's no single person's job. It's a part of somebody's job. And I think that was the problem going back to the 1990s. That it was an element within economic development, and there wasn't one officer dealing with it specifically to respond to those inquiries, not within a day, but within an hour of it coming in to say, yeah, we're interested, let's talk some more. And they have to be proactive, as the paper has said, as Simon Brayton has said, as Tracy has said. We have to be proactive and put information out there and use all those partners. So there's a lot of a mix of recommendations there, and the two that I mentioned earlier of not forgetting the guilds, and that the target cities of the Chinese cities that we already have relations with should be somewhere that we're reaching out to.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Daubney. Oh, Councillor Daubney, you're on mute. Oh, I got to say it 2 hours into the meeting before I could say you're on mute. There you go.
I shall try again. Thank you very much. Just to respond to Dave on that one, and to pick up something which I think Andrew mentioned earlier. And that is that I can remember distinctly a time when the fax machine buzzed, an inquiry came through from the Department of DEFRA, we'll call them for short, who were looking for an out-of-town space, large space, and also in-town space for offices. They eventually located to the city, but that inquiry was dealt with by Tony Bennett, our boss, in an afternoon. I would suggest within 2 hours. Liaising with Rydal District Council, and nowadays, of course, we have the Central Science Laboratory at St Hutton, and we have the offices at King's Pool in York. And that was an excellent example of reacting quickly to something which was very much in demand and satisfying all the requirements which they had, both inside the city and beyond.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Daubney. You're getting a thumbs up there from Councillor Taylor. Okay, so I think we're all sort of saying the same thing, really, is that we are looking for a joined up process and somebody who's going to champion it and take a lead on it and pull together all those strands that we've talked about, the guilds, the twin cities, and trying to make sure this works. Now, myself and Councillor Daubney can write that up into a formal form of words for Councillor Waller, but I think Councillor Waller's heard us loud and clear tonight.
The words, and I take on board the comments that have been made by councillors and also partners. I think it's part of the consultation process that we're going through, that to say that the world has changed since 2015 is probably an understatement, and therefore it's really the time to be doing this, and I welcome the suggestions, and I'm getting some very unsolicited comments from all across the city, so I think it's something that people are engaged in this conversation.
Great, thanks, Councillor Waller, and thank you to all our guests who've joined us here tonight. That discussion has gone on a bit longer than I anticipated, but I think it's a very useful and worthwhile one when we think about the future of our city. And we certainly heard you all loud and clear, so that's great. So thank you all again. Guests, you are all free to leave. Members and officers, I'm afraid you have to stay with us for at least one more item of business. Thank you all for coming. Okay, thanks. That just leaves us with, well, one more definite item of business, which is the Economic Recovery Strategy update. Who is it that's going to...
that probably comes to me yet again, Councillor Campbell, doesn't it?
You've had a bit, you're earning your money tonight, Simon, as ever.
It's like going through a Viva or something or other. This you have in front of you 5 annexes covering much of my output over the last 3 or 4 months in terms of where the economy is, the evidence base that underpins the work we're doing on the economic strategy, a paper around what we're doing with the economic strategy, my quarterly update from December of last year, and the various inputs that we've had into the recovery plans that are being developed for the city. So they tend to synthesize all of those things. Of course, none of them take into account the announcements of yesterday evening around what is going to be happening in terms of the roadmap going forward, and it's very clearly that is focusing our minds at the moment in terms of where we go to next. But you have there a summary of some of the challenges that we are facing as a city at the moment in terms of unemployment, some of the strengths of the city in terms of what I've said in there around our relatively high levels of productivity, which underpin a lot of what we've been talking about just now around our growth sectors, and a lot of our challenges as well in terms of the economy, in terms of things like the cost of housing in our city too as well. So if I had 3 hours, I could probably take you through all of those papers, but if you'll forgive me, I will assume that you've read and digested all of those. Very happy to answer any questions you have on where the economy is at the moment, what the evidence base says, the process that we're going through to develop the economic strategy and the skills plan, and what our thoughts are on where we're headed over the next few months.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I think we might have to start directing our questions to Tracy, though, Simon, because I don't think you're going to have a voice left in the morning at this rate. Councillor Douglas.
Thanks, Chair. I think if it's okay, in the interest of time, I'll just say my 2 questions.
Sure.
I wondered if you could give us an update, Simon, on the development of the economic strategy, where we're at with that, and perhaps how that's had to be adjusted. And then also about the Skills and Employment Board. I understand that the first meeting of that went ahead, and I'm just wondering what the outcome of that was, and if there's anything to be looked forward to there. Thank you.
So in terms of the economic strategy to start with, we had originally hoped that we would be kind of concluding a year ago, we were just beginning our consultation process on the economic strategy. That was clearly blown out of the water by COVID. We'd done a lot of our internal consultation within the council, and we were planning then to do the external work around that. That, as you'll have seen in the paper that went to Councillor Waller's decision session, whenever that was, earlier this month, we're now looking at doing the external engagement around that over the early summer, so kind of April, May, June, and bringing a strategy back in the autumn. The themes of that are reasonably well developed in terms of our focus on 21st century employment and on inclusive growth. And we've been through a lot of the detail, both in the Scrutiny committee and elsewhere around that. Some of the challenges around what we've said all along is that we want it to be an economic strategy which doesn't just reflect what a few large businesses in York want, but actually works much better for the city. So we need to, as we've said all along, do much better engagement with those people who traditionally haven't done so well from our economic strategy in the city. This morning at a decision session with Councillor Waller, we were looking at for instance, what we do in terms of some of the money that's been allocated in terms of poverty commission and really understanding the needs of those furthest from the economy. And our hope is that we will do that engagement much more properly over that period of early summer, alongside some early thoughts on economic strategy. So not really going in with a blank sheet of paper. And of course, alongside all of that, there's much broader engagement going on around a whole series of different strategies in the city as well, which all need to be joined together. So work around the future of the city centre through the My City Centre exercise, work towards a new local transport plan, which clearly is a large impact on the economy. And as you said, the work around the skills plan as well, and also the work around climate change and consultation around that. So part of a much broader piece of engagement, which I think you'll be seeing soon mapped out over the summer. We'll be doing our engagement on economic strategy and bringing that forward. Alongside that, really trying to nail the work around economic partnership, which again doesn't want to be a group of 10 people running large businesses in York. And if you look at our previous economic partnerships, they have been very white, elderly, male and middle class in terms of their input. We want to have a much more diverse economic partnership approach, which means bringing in lots of different voices into that process. So timescale wise, we're probably 6 months away from having an economic strategy to sign off. We've got the real legwork in terms of engagement to do over the early summer, and we're just beginning to finalise that. We'll be bringing back some proposals around that engagement to Councillor Waller's decision session in, I think it's either March or April. It says in the paper when we're going to be doing that, so I don't have that in front of me. I think it's April.
All right.
And in terms of the skills plan, that skills board has met once. You're right, there's another meeting this week actually, and the 1 year plan, which is, there's a huge amount of work going on in the background around the themes of that skills plan, which are to do with people, businesses, partnerships, and and pathways into work. There are 4 task groups which are now set up, which have begun meeting this week, with all of the education institutions of the city involved in them, and really strong input from employers. And they will be bringing forward a 1 year skills plan, which again you'll be seeing in the next few weeks in terms of a kind of post-COVID response to skills, and then a longer term piece which will be aligned with the economic strategy as well, in terms of our kind of 2 to 5 and then 5 to 10 year horizon skills plan, which all needs to be linked back into, again, what we've been talking about in terms of our high growth sectors in York. So there's a lot to bring together there, but it's going to be coming together over the summer and appearing in the autumn. And a lot of it will be things, I mean, there will be further opportunities for people to engage in terms of the work with both the skills plan and the economic strategy, and look forward to working with you all as that work really develops.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Tracy.
I think Simon's his own worst enemy on losing his voice, because he does actually manage to kind of nail it and say it all. So I was actually going to come in and talk a bit about the more inclusive conversation we want to have within the city. Economics is not one of those subjects that many people find quite as absorbing and interesting as we obviously do. And it's about how to have that conversation and making it relevant and inclusive, so it's not white, male, pale as Dale. And I think that we will end up at the end of this, despite all the interruptions that COVID has brought to us, I think we'll end up with a much more powerful economic strategy that's rooted in the challenges that the city faces, and the enforced partnership working that we've had to really work hard at this year, I think will make that much, much stronger. Andrew Digwood referred to that, but the way in which we've had to work together with businesses during the response to COVID, I think has forged a really strong partnership commitment, and we need to make the most of that and make that continue into the future. But we also need to understand the long-term impacts that COVID and Brexit are going to have on our economy, because I think the challenges which we face are fundamentally different to how they were a year ago, and we need to be tracking how they evolve over the coming years. And I think whilst we're all concentrating on the economic impact of COVID, it's very, very easy for the Brexit impacts to go unnoticed, and we have to be able to unpack those and understand those as we evolve that strategy.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. I have supplementaries, but I'm also conscious of the time. So let's move on to Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Simon, for the report. I was just looking at Annex A, page 62, paragraphs 38 and 39, but on the secondary shopping areas. Obviously, it's an important one for me as a Haxby councillor. I'm just interested to know, obviously, this report was dated the 23rd of December. I just wondered if there's any updates or any interesting news, particularly on the My Front Street project in Acomb, but also any future plans for Haxby and Wigginton.
Yeah, we're about to go. I mean, the time is just about where we can actually begin to do, again, the engagement work, particularly with residents around what we're now calling Future Front Street. We picked up with the consultancy team earlier this week on that. Again, it's very, very pertinent actually in terms of the kind of post-COVID world. What does shopping area like Acomb Front Street look like, and what's our appetite for doing something a bit different? We're also working up proposals at the moment with the expectation that we'll be asked to put stuff into the LEP funding around where they're going with their growth funding. So thinking about what we might do in capital project terms, and also thinking what the opportunities are in work that's going on both in Haxby and in Acomb to think about redeveloping libraries around potentially having workspace in there, and thinking about how we can offer opportunities for people who are now working from home or working remotely to come together, and what we might do to support that. So live work beginning to happen in terms of Acomb, and in terms of the commitments we've made to Haxby councillors. We are working on that brief at the moment, and we'll be back with you very soon on that, and beginning to think, well, how do we, there's very different challenges for the two areas. Again, let's not go into the full detail of that, but Acomb is a great secondary shopping area, Haxby is as well, but the public space there is very different, and some of the challenges in terms of what you might do with the public realm very different, and also the local business community is very different as well. But pleased that the work we've done with Haxby and Wigginton traders is really beginning to take off now. Acomb Alive has been a strong traders group already for some time, and we picked up this morning with Indy York, who are now have a new chair as of yesterday, and are looking to revitalise themselves and work. I know Councillor Kilbane, you've been very much involved in the Bishy Road Traders Association. That's a great model that we really want to work with outside of our city centre, and think how we can support retail across the whole of the city in what is going to be a very different world as we emerge from this, with a lot more enthusiasm for people to shop local, but also a lot of challenges in terms of how you run some of those businesses in a local fashion. So,
and I think this is one of those areas where the kind of post-COVID world might lead to a kind of rethinking of those areas. It's not just about retail, it's about those areas as places for business that are much closer to where people live. And obviously the announcement of funding to look into the possibility for a Haxby railway station, I think brings us some real positive challenges about how do we support business growth in those areas, and not just being about retail or hospitality. So Simon's conversations about workspace close to where you're home. If we are working from home more, then we still want to have those places where we go and have that kind of human contact whilst we're doing business, and have local growth spaces for businesses. And it might be a little bit about how we use those areas for growth hubs that are not just about those core sectors that we would traditionally have thought of.
Thank you both. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot of valuable information here, so thank you to all the officers involved. Just a word on skills contained in Annex B. I think there's one thing missing, and I made this point before to Alison Edison and to Councillor Waller as the executive member, is that there is no mention of heritage skills. And a focus on 21st century skills is right and proper, but York has preeminence in 17th, 18th, 19th, even 16th century skills. And there's a national, if not an international, dearth of these skills in restoration, construction, maintenance, those sorts of things. These are potentially jobs for life. they're highly skilled, they're manual trades, and they're less susceptible to the vagaries of international crises like Brexit. So my plea really is that York does not overlook heritage technologies, and I hope that the Skills Board is taking that on board.
Yeah, Councillor Taylor, you made that point very well at, I forget which other scrutiny board it was where we discussed that, and I can reassure you that your comments and thoughts have been taken into account in the last couple of weeks, and we have been having active discussions around that. I wouldn't see, I think when we talk about 21st century jobs, we're not just talking about people creating robots or things you can't even imagine yet. We're talking about patterns of work that fit the 21st century, as well as particular trades and particular types of work. So it's more about how do people make a living in the 21st century, as opposed to some quite, I think we all tend to have some quite old-fashioned views around kind of full-time work and part-time work and what's good work and what isn't good work. Regardless of what you do, you know, the reality is that what we think of as full-time, 37 hours a week, it doesn't reflect our 24/7 world anymore, and what we think of as part-time, 5 hours a week, and the connotations that go with the words part-time around suggesting that people aren't really committed to what they're doing and things, just don't reflect how people need to work to make a living, particularly in somewhere that's as expensive as York to live in. Everyone needs to make as much as money as they can. So what say in terms of 21st century jobs, we're not trying to say that the biblical trades are out. They can very much be part of that model. It's around how might people retrain to be mason or do restoration work. It's about making sure that we don't just think of those jobs are for young boys to be training about, but they're available across the whole of society. And you're absolutely right. We need cities such as York should have a strong training offer in those, particularly around some of those heritage things. And it's not just about what I touched on with immersive technology before. It's also about the practical hammering out bits of stone as well, isn't it? So that
you make a good point. You make a good point about immersive technologies, and you mentioned Jorvik before, how these things can come together, our understanding of how buildings were built in Viking times and how leather has been preserved from the 10th century underwater, and how we then present that to the public in the 21st century. So I think these things tie together, and it's not either or.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I can see no further questions from members. I've just got one myself, which I'm going to direct at Tracy, just to give Simon's voice a rest, but also because it's positive challenges, I think was the phrase that you used, Tracy, which is I'm going to use as my new phrase. And I noticed in the report that one of the positive challenges that we could be facing in the summer it'd be a huge influx of domestic tourists. Particularly if the people don't go abroad this year for whatever reason for the holidays, then York could clearly see itself attracting quite a lot of those tourists. So what are we going to need to do to make sure we can cope? Now, clearly, you know, if they replace the tourists from overseas that we get, then, you know, if we got up to that number, it will be something. But these are going to be in post-COVID times where there's going to be sort of restrictions still in place. So what are we going to need to do to make sure that we can cope with potentially quite a large influx of domestic tourists in the summer? Oh, hopefully, I should say, a large influx of domestic tourists.
Yeah, and it's about walking that balance between the kind of safety and the sense of security and safety for everybody in the city centre, and actually generating the kind of footfall that's going to support those industries that have suffered most. So I think my reflection is that the city made a pretty good job last year of launching into the reopening in a really positive way that felt safe and supportive. And the guidance that came out yesterday is clearly pointing us towards much more focused on outdoor spaces. So that's going to be our starting point. We're now starting that work to prepare for opening up, and we will be banking some of the things that we did last year around the increased foot streets areas, and the street cafe licensings, etc., etc. And I think we're just looking at what can we do to increase the trading space for our city businesses, and what do we need to do to promote that so that it is the people who are coming to have their staycations in York are the ones who are going to do so that in a way that contributes across the way. So we're really just starting to work on that. It may be an area where you actually want to think about having some scrutiny action on it as an urgent issue, because I think it's really important that it has got cross-party support and that we've got as many brains on it as possible.
Okay, I can see that Simon wants to come in. He's clearly got some life left in his voice.
So alongside of that, how do we use the space, which is a really important part of this? There's also how do we promote York as well? I mean, in some ways you say, hopefully, I think it's almost inevitable that people will come to York because we know what a beautiful city we are, and people around the UK know that. How can we get out there the right kind of messages around the behaviour that we kind of expect of people when they come to York? And there's some really interesting work that the comms team are doing with Public Health England around some of that kind of behavioural work, which is a very core to a lot of public health messaging around how you link that through into tourism. So some really interesting, really innovative work that the public health people haven't really got involved in before is going to be trialled here in York, and we'll be developing that over the next few weeks around, as I say, how do we make sure that when those people do come to York, and they will come, how do we make sure that they do the right things to keep themselves and everybody else safe at the same time, and make the most of it. And again, talking today with colleagues from Visit York and Welcome to Yorkshire about how we join up our efforts to promote the city and to promote it as safe. And how can we do that in a fun way, which isn't about boring messages about what you shouldn't do, and it actually gets across our sense of the great place that York is, and reinforces some of those strong messages about how to behave nicely in York and have a good time.
Yeah, and not just letting that 1 year focus drift. So if we establish ourselves in the minds of the people of Britain as a great place to come year in, year out, it's not just that you can't go elsewhere, so you might come to York. It's actually, this might actually be your idea of an ideal holiday. And thankfully, we've got a slightly longer planning window than we had at any point just last year, where we were having to respond virtually within 24 hours. So we now know some of the things that we need to watch out for in terms of unexpected and unpleasant consequences. And hopefully the toilets will be open from the very beginning.
Let's hope that remains the case with the no sudden announcements. Councillor Douglas, I'm going to give you the last question, and then we really must wrap it up.
Thanks. It's not actually a question. It's just to add to what was just said around promoting York and bringing people in. But I think we also need to remember that the people that have kept our city centre going and our businesses there in this period have been the locals. And so we don't want to end up in a position where local people feel like they're not considered in all of this, that they might say again, and that we just keep them very much in mind and make sure they keep coming in as well as visitors too.
Yeah, and to add to that, Councillor Douglas, it's not just about the city centre. So we've got a hospitality sector which does operate out in other residential areas, and we need to think a little bit about how to support those businesses during the opening up phase when outdoor space may be quite limited in some areas. So we'll be looking at that as well.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. Much work to be done, and thank you very much for all the work that you've done in preparation for this meeting tonight and for your contributions this evening. I'm going to wrap the meeting up now, so thank you all very much, councillors, for your attendance, and thank you as well to the officers behind the scenes who people can't see on the webcast, who made the whole thing happen, the democracy officers and the technology officers, without whom all council's functions would have ground to a halt many months ago. So thanks again. Thank you all for your attendance, and until the next time, I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.
Confirm the live stream has now ended. If I can